From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
After a 14-year-old gunman opens fire at a high school outside Atlanta, Georgia, killing 4 and injuring 9, officials arrest him as well as his father for having knowingly provided access to the weapon. Plus, Hunter Biden pleads guilty in federal court to charges that he failed to pay about $1.4 million in taxes, but not without the first son trying to avoid accountability one last time. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnists Kim Strassel and Bill McGurn. Apalachee High School in Georgia was the site of the latest grim, tragic, heartbreaking mass shooting in the United States. Just to provide some of the background, going by the CNN timeline, it says that at about 9:45 on Wednesday, Colt Gray left his Algebra 1 classroom. Then he returned with a gun but was unable to get into the classroom because the door was shut. So then he went to the classroom next door and opened fire. It says that the sheriff's office was notified at around 10:20, arrived shortly thereafter, confronted the shooter who surrendered to the deputy and was taken into custody. Interesting, though, now is the swift charging of his father as well. Let's start with a clip of an official. This is the director of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation announcing those charges in a news conference.
Colin is Colt Gray's father that was arrested yesterday. He is charged with the following: 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts of second-degree murder, and 8 counts of cruelty to children. Mr. Gray, these charges stem from Mr. Gray knowingly allowing his son, Colt, to possess a weapon.
This is apparently somewhat rare. The Washington Post says that there were at least 195 school shootings between Columbine in 1999 and this one. In 80% of those cases, the firearms were taken from the child's home or those of relatives or friends. Yet only 11 times were adult owners of the weapons charged with any crime. Kim, what do you make of this, charging the father who apparently provided this weapon to the 14-year-old shooter?
We've been seeing this happen more, and I have to say, as a gun owner and someone who has canvassed other gun owners, I think there's support for this approach, because the reality is one of the arguments that those who believe in the Second Amendment make quite strongly is that most of the people out there who own firearms are responsible gun owners. And if that is your argument, then there is certainly a case to be made that part of owning a gun responsibly is ensuring that young children or troubled children do not have easy access to those guns. We're seeing increasingly cases of this, of prosecutors bringing these suits. But one thing that's interesting to me is that every jurisdiction where this has happened, what they've done is reach back into the criminal code and come up with a charge that lets them go after the parent. So in this case, as you just heard the official say, the father in this case is being charged with counts of involuntary manslaughter, counts of cruelty to children. If you look at other cases in Michigan earlier this year, there were parents of a child. They'd actually given him or were giving him a handgun for early Christmas present. He ended up taking it to school, killing 4 people. He was charged. The parents in that case, who did go to prison, were found guilty, were found of unintentional homicide. There was a Virginia case, a 6-year-old who shot and injured a teacher in Newport News, Virginia. The mother in that case was charged with 2 years for child neglect. And my point here being is that I don't have necessarily an issue with responsibility holding parents somewhat liable for this, but it would probably be very beneficial if the discussion that began to happen in states was about legislatures making clear the rules of the road here with changes to the criminal code that also just simply clarify the situations in which you are liable. Is it negligence? I think that's a word that really matters here. What happens in the case where the parents did take steps, but somehow the children got around them? There's a lot of unknown territory. And if the goal here is to encourage parents to make sure that their kids don't have access to these firearms by knowing that they are potentially responsible, probably would be much more effective to have that as a law than to simply have prosecutors winging it, not really knowing whether or if they will bring charges and what they would be based on and whether or not those cases would succeed.
Bill, I find it hard to disagree with that. And if the goal is to induce more parents and gun owners to secure their firearms, passing that kind of legislation, I can only imagine, would help with that cause. We are still waiting to learn more about the facts of this case. But in 2023, according to some of the law enforcement statements, they interviewed this now 14-year-old after he reportedly made some kind of online post that was reported as a threat to commit a school shooting. And then the news reports are suggesting that, similar to that Michigan case, Colin Gray then provided this firearm as a holiday present for his son. That is not confirmed yet, but again, that has been reported by CNN. Here is what it says. CNN is saying that the teen's father, Colin Gray, told investigators at the time that that threat was investigated that he had hunting rifles in the house, but that Colin was not allowed to use them unsupervised and did not have access to them. But then reporting that he told investigators he purchased the gun used in this school shooting as a holiday present in December 2023. And Bill, you can think of other situations if there's a parent who is having a party and hosting a party for his teenagers and allowing them access to alcohol, and one of them gets in a car and drives and gets into an accident and kills people. I can only imagine that those parents would be held liable for that by the justice system.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I agree with what Kim laid out. I am a firm supporter of holding the parents responsible, but I think a bedrock principle of criminal law is that to be guilty, you have to have committed a positive act or an act of criminal negligence where it's so reckless it rises to criminal levels. In these cases, it wasn't just buying a gun or not having it secured. It was buying a gun when the kid had been in trouble at school. There had been reports, the FBI saw them, the school saw them, of really troubled behavior. So I think that's fair game. But I also think there are other circumstances. I don't think this is going to really solve the problem of school shootings. I think the problem is bigger than federal law, state law, what mental health experts can do. There's a real crisis in the culture of these kids who are lost and angry. You can name the influences: pornography, the violent video games, and let's not forget the families. I think in this case, the dad was estranged from his wife, right? So you got a lot of these angry kids in homes with the mom. The father's not really in their life the way they should be. So I think it's a good start, but I think our children need so much more to help them. And I think if you look at the school shootings and you look at absent fathers, it's not the only factor, but it is a dominant one. And I don't know that we can solve that with the federal DAD program or something. I think the cure might be more strengthen the community and give the community more tools.
We'll be right back in a moment. Welcome back. Kim, no doubt this case will be tested in the Georgia courts, and part of the father's culpability, as Bill suggests, might depend on the kinds of details about what he knew. So this is the statement from the FBI. It says that in May 2023, the FBI's National Threat Operations Center received anonymous tips about online threats to commit a school shooting. They included photographs of guns. The FBI determined the posts originated in Georgia. That was handed off to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, which located the suspect, a 13-year-old male at the time, interviewed him and his father. The 13-year-old denied making those statements. there was no probable cause for arrest or to take any additional law enforcement action. So we'll probably learn more with specificity about what those threats actually looked like and what the father and what the son said in those interviews. But Kim, to the broader point that Bill is making, are there other steps that you think states or the federal government ought to be taking to try to head off these kinds of awful, tragic events?
Well, one of those goes to the interview that you just mentioned, because we've had in some of these school shootings later reports that these kids who ultimately committed these heinous acts were on law enforcement radar, or the school's radar, the mental health system's radar. And at times, the law enforcement or schools had touched those students, meaning that they had had interaction with them in the past. What we're finding, though, is it can be very difficult. So in this case, some of the early reporting is that they did find this kid. They did go do an interview. The kid swore it wasn't him that did the posting. The father claimed that he did not have unsupervised access to firearms. But according to some of the reporting, the posting was on Discord. There were some confusing questions. It could have been located at a couple of different addresses. They really didn't know, at least this is the reporting so far, they couldn't verify with certainty that it was this particular kid who posted this material that was quite alarming. In other situations, we've heard that they've had contact with kids, but what do you do? And I think that that's one of the great unsolved questions here is, even when we get these guys on the radar, we want a system where we are picking up and following up on supposed threats, and we know that somebody is potentially an issue. But then what? And that gets into some very complicated issues. Mental health laws, school regulations, how they handle kids. I mean, one thing that we've learned, for instance, is schools in recent years have taken on a policy, well, even kids that are very troubled, that have made threats, we're not doing suspensions, we need to embrace them. There has to be a lot of conversation about how we handle. We are living in a time of greater mental health problems among young people, but we have not had many of the hard conversations we need to have about what we do with those individuals when we realize that they are suffering, that they do have an issue. How do we keep them and those around them safe?